On the night Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, Grace Miller, a weary black nurse driving home after an overtime shift, suddenly spotted an old man in a soaked gray suit stranded beside a flooded Cadillac. His ankle was twisted, his face pale with pain. She quickly turned off the engine, stepped out, and took him to the hospital despite his proud insistence that he was fine. What Grace didn't know was that the man was a wealthy billionaire and that just 3 days later she would face a trouble she could never have imagined. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow, I've got something extra special for you. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up. Grace Miller gripped the steering wheel of her Ford F-150, squinting through sheets of rain that hammered against the glass like bullets. August 25, 2017, the night Hurricane Harvey made landfall in Texas, and Spencer Highway had transformed into a river. Water splashed over the truck's hood as she pushed through, the engine growling in protest. Just get home. Just get home. She'd pulled a double shift at the small community hospital in Pasadena, 12 hours of chaos as Harvey approached. Patients flooding in with last-minute emergencies, families seeking shelter, the smell of antiseptic mixing with fear. Her scrubs still smelled like it: sweat, betadine, and desperation. The radio crackled with emergency warnings. Catastrophic flooding expected. Stay off roads. This is a life-threatening situation. Grace was 42, a registered nurse for 18 years, and she knew better. She should have stayed at the hospital, but her apartment, her cat, the picture of her mother on the nightstand, she needed to check, just once, before the world went dark. That's when her headlights caught him. A figure hunched on the shoulder of the road, barely visible through the downpour. An elderly man, sitting on the ground, clutching his leg. Next to him, a black Cadillac Escalade, with its hazards blinking weakly. Grace's foot hit the brake instinctively. No, don't stop. This is insane. But her hands were already turning the wheel, pulling onto what remained of the shoulder. She killed the engine, took a breath, and pushed open the door. Wind and rain slammed into her like a physical wall. "Sir," she had to shout over the roar of the storm. "Sir, are you hurt?" The man looked up, late 70s, maybe early 80s, silver hair plastered to his skull, expensive wool coat soaked through. Even in the chaos, Grace noticed his watch, a Patek Philippe, the kind that cost more than her truck. "My leg," he gasped. "Can't put weight on it. I called my driver." "Your driver isn't coming." Grace cut him off, already assessing his ankle, swollen, possibly sprained, definitely not broken. "The roads are flooding, we need to move now." "I don't need." He tried to stand, winced, collapsed back. "I can wait in my car." Grace looked at the Escalade. Water was already creeping up to the doors. In 30 minutes, maybe less, that vehicle would be underwater. She'd seen it during Tropical Storm Allison, cars floating like toys, people trapped inside. "That car is going to flood." She kept her voice steady, the same tone she used with stubborn patience. "The storm doesn't care how much your car cost. It doesn't care who you are." He stared at her, rain streaming down his face. For a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes, fear, maybe, or the shock of being powerless. "What's your name?" she asked, softer now. "Richard." He swallowed. "Richard Ashford." Grace didn't recognize the name, though she'd later learn he owned half the commercial real estate in Houston. Right now, he was just a scared old man with a bad ankle in the middle of a hurricane. "Okay, Richard, I'm Grace, I'm a nurse, and I'm going to get you somewhere safe. But you need to trust me." She didn't wait for an answer. Grace splashed back to her truck, popped the tailgate, and pulled out the folded wheelchair she kept there. Her mother's, from the last 6 months of her life. She'd meant to donate it, but kept forgetting. Or maybe she hadn't been ready to let go. "Thank you, Mama," she thought, dragging it through the water. "I don't need that," Richard protested as she approached. "I'm not, you can't walk," Grace said firmly, "and I can't carry you. So unless you want to swim, this is how we do it." Something in her tone, the no-nonsense authority of a woman who'd spent 2 decades dealing with difficult patients, made him stop arguing. She helped him into the chair, her arms straining with his weight, rain blinding her. The wheelchair's wheels sank into the waterlogged ground. Every push forward felt like moving through concrete. By the time she got him to the truck and heaved him into the passenger seat, Grace's arms were shaking, her scrubs clung to her skin. Water squished in her shoes. Richard sat rigid in the seat, staring straight ahead. "You know who I am." Grace started the engine, checked her mirrors, nothing but darkness and rain, and pulled back onto Spencer Highway. "No, should I? Most people do." "Well, I don't watch much TV." She navigated around a floating trash can. "But I know you're hurt, and I know the hospital is the only place open tonight that can help. I have a personal physician, who's probably evacuated by now." Grace glanced at him. "Look, Mr. Ashford, I get it. You're used to a certain level of care. But tonight, all that matters is staying alive. Ben Taub Hospital is 10 minutes from here if the roads hold. That's where we're going." They drove in silence, broken only by the rhythmic thump of wipers and the howl of wind. Grace's hands ached on the wheel. She thought of her apartment, her cat Beans probably hiding under the bed, terrified. She thought of her mother, who taught her that you help people, period. No conditions, no questions. "Why did you stop?" Richard asked suddenly. Grace didn't take her eyes off the road. "Because you needed help. You don't know me, I could be dangerous." She let out a short laugh. "You can barely stand. And honestly, Mr. Ashford, I've dealt with worse on a Friday night in the ER." Ben Taub Hospital appeared through the rain like a beacon. Lights blazing, ambulances clustered at the entrance, people running through the storm. Grace pulled up to the ER bay, ignoring the no parking signs. Tonight rules didn't matter. She grabbed the wheelchair from the back, helped Richard into it again, and pushed him through the automatic doors. Inside was controlled chaos. Gurneys lined the hallways, nurses shouting orders, families huddled in corners, the smell of wet clothes and fear thick in the air. "I need a bed," Grace told the harried admissions nurse. "Possible ankle fracture, elderly male, take a number." The nurse snapped, then saw Grace's hospital badge from Pasadena Community. Her expression softened slightly. "Sorry, we're overwhelmed. I'll get someone to triage him, but it might be a while." Grace nodded. She understood. She wheeled Richard to a corner, found 2 plastic chairs, and helped him transfer. He moved stiffly, pain etched in every line of his face. "You should go," he said once he was seated. "Go home. I can manage from here." Grace looked at the packed ER, at the storm still raging outside, at this proud man who couldn't even stand without help. She thought about driving back into that nightmare, about her flooded apartment, about being alone. "I'll stay until they see you," she heard herself say. "Just to make sure you're okay." Richard looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. "You're a strange woman, Grace." She smiled tiredly. "I'm a nurse, Mr. Ashford. This is what we do." They sat together in the chaos, 2 strangers bound by a storm and a moment of kindness, neither knowing that this night would change everything. Outside, Hurricane Harvey continued to rage, and the worst was yet to come. 3 hours crawled by. Grace had watched the ER transform from chaos into something beyond description. Water had started seeping under the doors. The power flickered twice, sending anxious murmurs through the crowd. Medical staff rushed between patients with the efficient desperation of people fighting a losing battle. Richard had been x-rayed, severe sprain, no fracture, and given crutches he could barely use. A young doctor, looking like he hadn't slept in days, had wrapped the ankle and prescribed rest and elevation. "We need to admit you overnight," the doctor said, scanning his tablet. "That ankle needs monitoring, and honestly, sir, there's nowhere else to send you. The storm's getting worse." "I can go to a hotel," Richard started. "Hotels are flooding." The doctor didn't look up. "This is the safest place in Houston right now. We'll find you a bed." That's when the admissions clerk appeared, clipboard in hand, exhaustion written in the dark circles under her eyes. "Mr. Ashford, we have 1 bed available." "Thank God," Richard muttered. "In room 307, she paused. "Shared room. The other patient is, well, he's been here a while." Richard's expression hardened. "I need a private room." "Sir, we don't have private rooms tonight. We have room 307, or you can wait in the hallway." The clerk's voice was flat, pushed past politeness by sheer fatigue. "It's your choice." Grace watched the war play out on Richard's face, pride versus pain versus pragmatism. Finally he nodded stiffly. They took the service elevator to the 3rd floor, the wheelchair creaking under Richard's weight. Grace pushed, though she'd technically been relieved of duty, but something kept her there, a stubborn sense of responsibility she'd inherited from her mother. Room 307 was at the end of a long corridor, lights flickering overhead. The door stood half open, revealing a typical hospital double, 2 beds separated by a thin curtain, 1 window overlooking the storm. And in the far bed, propped up against pillows, sat a man in his early 70s with a weathered face, a shock of white hair, and hands wrapped around a battered acoustic guitar. He looked up as they entered, and his face broke into a smile that transformed him entirely. "Well, well," he said, his voice warm as summer honey. "Looks like the Lord's sending me a roommate. Welcome to the 5-star resort of the Almighty." Grace felt Richard stiffen beside her. The man set his guitar carefully on the bedside table and extended a hand. "Frank Lopez, though most folks at the shelter call me Frank the Guitar Man." "Shelter." Grace saw Richard's jaw clench. "Richard Ashford," he said coldly, not taking Frank's hand. Frank withdrew it without offense, that easy smile never wavering. "Ashford Towers, right, downtown, beautiful building. Always wondered what the view looked like from up there. I'm sure you have." Richard's voice could have frozen water. An uncomfortable silence settled. Grace cleared her throat. "Mr. Lopez, I'm Grace. I'm a nurse, just helping Mr. Ashford get settled." "Good people," Frank said approvingly. "Nurses are God's hands on earth, my mama used to say. She was a nurse too, down in Corpus." Grace helped Richard transfer to his bed, the one closer to the door. He moved awkwardly on the crutches, clearly in pain but too proud to show it. Once he was settled, she adjusted his pillows, checked his ankle wrap. "You should go," Richard said, not looking at her. "I'm fine now." But Grace glanced out the window at the storm, now truly terrifying, wind bending trees horizontal, rain so thick it looked solid. The parking lot below was a lake. Her truck sat in 3 feet of water. "I don't think anyone's going anywhere tonight," she said quietly. As if in confirmation, the lights flickered, died, then surged back with a generator's hum. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the room in harsh fluorescent half-light. Frank chuckled. "And the Lord said let there be light. Well, some light anyway. Is everything a joke to you?" Richard snapped. "Not everything," Frank replied mildly. "But I learned a long time ago that you can laugh, or you can cry, and laughing feels better on your face. Easy to say when you have nothing to lose." The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel. Grace saw something flicker in Frank's eyes, not anger, but a deep old sadness. "You're right," Frank said softly. "I don't have much. Got my guitar, got these clothes, got a bed at St. Vincent's shelter when there's room. Lost pretty much everything else about 8 years back. And whose fault was that?" Richard's voice was acid. "Mine mostly." Frank met his gaze steadily. "Lost my job when the school district cut music programs. Lost my house 6 months later. Lost my wife." His voice caught. "Lost her in a hospital, just like this one, because we didn't have insurance, and they couldn't do the treatment in time." The silence that followed was suffocating. Grace found her voice. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Lopez." "Frank, please. And don't be sorry, you didn't do nothing wrong. Life's just—" He gestured vaguely at the storm outside. "Life's just like that hurricane out there. Comes at you hard, takes what it wants. Question is, what do you do after it passes?" "Rebuild," Grace said automatically. "Exactly." Frank smiled at her. "You rebuild, or you help someone else rebuild, or you just sit with them in the rubble, and remind them they're not alone. That's all any of us can do." Richard turned his face to the wall. Grace felt suddenly exhausted, her double shift and the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. A nurse poked her head in, one Grace recognized from conferences. "Hey Miller, you look dead on your feet. There's a cot in the break room if you want it. Nobody's going home tonight." Grace nodded gratefully. She looked between the 2 men, Richard rigid with disgust, Frank relaxed as if having a picnic. "Oil and water, heaven and earth. I'll check on you both in a bit," she said. "Thank you, Angel," Frank called out as she left, "for bringing our friend here safely." In the hallway, Grace leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Through the door she heard Frank pick up his guitar, strumming softly. The melody was Amazing Grace, her mother's favorite hymn. She smiled despite her exhaustion. This was going to be a long night. Grace woke to darkness and shouting. No generator hum, no emergency lights, just sudden, absolute blackness. She fumbled for her phone. Its weak glow barely pushed back the dark. 2:47 a.m. Voices echoed down the hall, nurses calling, wheels squeaking. someone crying softly. Beneath it all, Harvey's howl shook the hospital. Grace grabbed her phone and hurried toward 307, its light guiding her through the chaos. Other nurses passed, their own beams bobbing like fireflies in the dark. Room 307's door stood ajar. Inside, Frank's voice rose steady and calm. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. He sat upright in bed, guitar across his lap. On the opposite bed, Richard lay rigid, staring at the ceiling. Power's out across the hospital, Grace said, sweeping her light around. They're fixing it, sure they are. Frank chuckled. Meanwhile, we got starlight. He pointed at the window, where between breaks in the clouds, a few stars shone faintly. See, even in the storm, God's lights stay on. Starlight won't fix his ankle, Richard muttered. No, but it reminds us we're still here. Frank's fingers moved over the strings, a soft tune filling the room. You know what I told my students, when the lights go out, that's when you really learn to see. You were a teacher? Grace asked. Music, 23 years at Travis Middle. Kids came in angry, lost, and for 45 minutes, music made them whole again. Why'd you stop? Budget cuts 2009. They killed every art class. I tried to find another job, but no one hires an aging music teacher with no business degree. So you just gave up, Richard said flatly. Frank smiled in the dark. Gave up. I still teach, just not in classrooms. Street corners, shelters, parks. My students don't pay tuition, but they learn all the same. Grace smiled, though he couldn't see it. That's noble, Richard said dryly. Teaching homeless people guitar. You think it's not? Frank asked mildly. What do you do, Mr. Ashford? I build real estate. Commercial properties. Employ thousands. Then we both build things, Frank said, still plucking softly. You build places for people to work. I build songs for them to live through. It's not the same. No, Frank agreed. Yours last for decades. Mine fade when the music stops. But sometimes that's enough. Grace felt tension simmer. Mr. Ashford, it's all right, Frank cut in. Man's hurt, scared, stuck where he didn't choose. Happens to the best of us. I'm not scared, Richard snapped. Sure you are. We all are. That's why God gave us each other, so we don't have to be scared alone. Thunder cracked outside, shaking the glass. Grace's phone light flickered. I should save my battery. Turn it off, Frank said. I've got light enough in my memories. Darkness settled again. Frank's guitar whispered, what a wonderful world. My wife loved this one, he murmured. Maria, we danced to it at our wedding, and I played it at her funeral. He spoke softly, his voice a blend of grief and peace. Cancer, no insurance. By the time she saw a doctor, it was too late. I still come to hospitals though. Figure if I lost her here, maybe I can help someone else not feel so alone. Grace blinked away tears. Frank, I'm sorry. Don't be. Pain's part of the song. Richard's voice cut through the dark. You make poverty sound holy. Not holy, Frank said, just human. Poverty's cruel, but what you do when it strips you bare, that's what matters. You can still choose kindness. Easy to say when you've got nothing to lose. Wrong. Frank's voice hardened. I've got my dignity, my music, the memory of a woman who loved me. That's everything. The room fell silent. Then Richard spoke quietly. 40 years I built an empire, and now I can't even get to the bathroom without help, can't control anything. Maybe that's the point, Frank said gently. Storms remind us control's an illusion. Don't patronize me. I'm not, Frank replied, just saying, we're not so different, both builders, both broken. I doubt I can learn from you. Frank chuckled. Everybody can learn from somebody, even me. Grace listened, heart tight. She thought of her mother, of kindness as a choice, of the strange contrast, one man rich and bitter, the other poor and peaceful. When Grace stepped out, Richard reached for his phone, one flickering bar of service. He dialed Harold, his assistant. Get me out of here, Richard hissed. Transfer me to Memorial Herman. I don't care the cost. A pause crackled through static. Harold hesitated. Sir, with all due respect, you shouldn't have been out there alone. The highway's underwater. Your driver called. He tried to warn you before you left for Ellington Field. I wasn't alone, Richard snapped. He panicked and ran when the water rose. I was checking the construction site, my site. If I don't, no one does. Sir, Mrs. Ashford, what about her? Mrs. Ashford told me to cancel your trip. Said the storm was dangerous. You told her she was overreacting. Richard exhaled sharply, jaw tight. And now she thinks she's proved her point. She made it clear you should stay there until further notice. Richard stared at the wall, realizing. So that's it, he muttered. She wants me to learn humility. Sir, forget it. He hung up. The phone's glow faded, leaving him in silence. She thinks humility's a weekend course, he said bitterly to the dark. From the next bed came Frank's calm voice. Everything all right, partner? My wife arranged this, Richard said. She and my assistant. She wants me to see how the other half lives. Well, Frank mused. Looks like she got her wish. I don't belong here. Maybe that's the point, Frank said quietly. Sometimes God puts us where we don't belong, so we remember where we came from. Grace returned. Her phone's dim light brushed across both faces, one restless, one serene. Frank, she whispered, would you play Amazing Grace? My mother loved it. Course, angel. His fingers found the strings, the melody blooming gentle in the dark. Grace closed her eyes, hearing her mother's voice in memory. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Somewhere in the dark, Richard wept quietly, as if ashamed to be heard. Frank kept singing, rough but steady, a lighthouse in the storm. Outside, Harvey roared on. Inside room 307, something shifted, small and fragile, like the first crack in a dam. And somewhere deep beneath Richard Ashford's armor of wealth and pride, a single drop of light slipped through. Morning came gray and exhausted. The power had returned around 5 a.m., bringing with it harsh fluorescent reality. Grace had dozed in the chair, her neck cramped, her back screaming in protest. When she opened her eyes, weak daylight filtered through the rain-streaked window, revealing the full scope of Harvey's violence. Trees snapped like toothpicks, debris scattered across flooded streets, cars submerged to their roofs. Frank was already awake, reading a pocket Bible, lips moving silently. Richard lay on his side, facing away, his breathing suggesting he was awake, but unwilling to acknowledge it. A nurse Grace didn't recognize came in with breakfast trays, cold oatmeal, orange juice, coffee that smelled burnt. Cafeteria's barely functioning, she apologized, but it's hot and it's food. Richard sat up slowly, wincing. His face looked haggard, older somehow, as if the night had aged him years. He reached for his water cup on the bedside table, and froze. Where is it? What's that? Frank looked up from his Bible. My ring. Richard's voice was tight, controlled panic underneath. My wedding ring. It was right here. Grace stood, instantly alert. Are you sure? Maybe it fell. I'm sure. Richard was checking under his pillow, the sheets, the floor beside the bed with increasing desperation. It was right here, platinum band with a diamond. I took it off because my hand was swelling. Put it right on this table. Frank set down his Bible. When did you see it last? Last night, before the lights went out. Richard's hands were shaking now. It was my wife's grandmother's diamond. We had it reset. He stopped, pressing his palms against his eyes. 43 years I've worn that ring. Never took it off except to sleep. Grace dropped to her knees, checking under the bed, the nightstand, anywhere the ring might have fallen. Nothing but dust and a forgotten pen. Her mind raced. Expensive ring, crowded hospital, people desperate after a hurricane. The nurse who'd brought breakfast stood frozen in the doorway. I'll get security. Within minutes, room 307 filled with people. A hospital security guard, tired and overwhelmed. Dr. Wallace, the attending physician, a severe woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sharper judgment. 2 more nurses, whispering to each other. When exactly did you notice it missing? Dr. Wallace asked, her tone clinical. This morning, but I had it last night, I'm certain. And who was in the room? Richard gestured vaguely. Mr. Lopez, Grace, the nurse who brought me in. The staff, Dr. Wallace's gaze swept the room, lingering on Frank, then settling on Grace with uncomfortable intensity. You were here all night? Yes, Grace said, feeling her stomach drop. I checked on them several times. I stayed in the break room mostly. But you're not on staff here. No, I work at Pasadena Community. I was just helping. I see. Dr. Wallace's expression hardened. And you had access to this room throughout the night. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Grace felt her face burn. I didn't take anything. Why would I? I'm not accusing anyone. But Dr. Wallace's tone said otherwise. However, given the circumstances, an expensive item missing, non-staff personnel present, we need to investigate thoroughly. Now wait a minute, Frank started to protest. Mr. Lopez, were you awake all night, on and off? These beds aren't exactly comfortable. Did you see anyone enter the room? Few nurses. Grace checked on us. Nobody suspicious. Dr. Wallace turned back to Grace. I'm going to need you to empty your pockets. The words hit like a slap. Grace stared at her, heat flooding her face, not embarrassment, but rage. Pure white-hot rage at the casual assumption, the immediate judgment. You think I stole his ring? I think we need to eliminate possibilities. Dr. Wallace's voice remained infuriatingly calm. You're not a staff member here. You brought Mr. Ashford in during the storm. You had access and opportunity. I saved his life. Grace's voice cracked. I drove through a hurricane, pulled him out of rising water, got him here safely, and you think I robbed him?
Nobody's saying that. The security guard interjected, though his hand rested on his radio. But ma'am, if you could just cooperate. This is bullshit, Frank said sharply, surprising everyone. Grace didn't take nothing. I was here all night. I would have seen. You said yourself you were sleeping on and off. Dr. Wallace's attention shifted to him. And frankly, Mr. Lopez, given your situation, you're hardly an impartial witness. My situation? Frank's jaw tightened. You mean because I'm homeless? I mean because anyone living in a shelter understands the value of a platinum ring. The accusation, unspoken but clear, filled the room like smoke. Grace saw Frank's hands curl into fists, saw the muscles in his jaw work. But he said nothing. Just stared at Dr. Wallace with something like pity. Richard had been silent throughout, watching the scene unfold. Now he spoke, his voice flat and distant. Just search them both. Get this over with. The words landed like stones in still water. Grace felt something break inside her chest, something that had been holding together through the double shift, the storm, the fear, the exhaustion. She'd driven through a hurricane to save this man, risked her life, and now he sat there, casual as ordering lunch, suggesting she be searched like a criminal. Fine, she pulled out her pockets, empty except for a crumpled tissue and 2 quarters. Held her arms out. Want to pat me down too? Check my shoes. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. That won't be necessary. Oh, but it is. Grace's voice was shaking now, tears of rage blurring her vision. Because apparently when a poor person helps a rich person, the assumption is theft. When a nurse spends her own time, uses her own gas, risks her own safety, the assumption is ulterior motive. Grace Frank tried. No, she turned to Richard, who couldn't meet her eyes. You know what? You're right to check. Because how could someone like me possibly just be kind? There must be an angle. Must be something in it for me. She laughed, a bitter sound. God forbid someone just does something good because it's the right thing to do. If people would just do their jobs properly, Dr. Wallace said coldly, valuables wouldn't go missing. Grace stared at her, at this woman who'd probably never worked a double shift in her life, who'd never had to choose between gas and groceries, who looked at Grace's 10-year-old scrubs and saw not a dedicated nurse but a potential thief. I didn't take your ring, Mr. Ashford, Grace said quietly, gathering what remained of her dignity, and if that's what you believe, if that's what you think of the person who saved you last night, then I feel sorry for you. Not because you lost a ring, because you lost something much more valuable a long time ago. She walked toward the door. Where are you going? Dr. Wallace demanded. Home, if I can get there through the flood. Grace didn't turn around. You want to search me? Call the police, have them meet me in the parking lot. But I'm done being treated like a criminal in a place I came to help. Grace, wait, Frank called out, but she was already gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall until she was alone. Behind her, in room 307, silence settled like fog. Frank turned to Richard slowly, his usual warmth replaced by something harder. You lost a ring, she just lost her faith in humanity. Which one's worth more, you think? Richard said nothing, staring at his empty hands. Dr. Wallace cleared her throat. We'll continue the investigation. Check the surveillance footage, interview staff. You do that, Frank said softly. But you won't find nothing. That woman's got more integrity in her little finger than most folks have in their whole body. You barely know her, Dr. Wallace countered. I know enough. Watched her all night, taking care of two strangers, no complaint, no expectation of thanks. That's not the behavior of a thief, that's the behavior of someone who actually gives a damn. Frank picked up his guitar, cradling it like a child. You people don't understand value at all. You see a platinum ring and think that's worth something. But kindness, compassion, the willingness to drive through a hurricane for someone you don't know. He shook his head. That's priceless, and you just accused it of being theft. Dr. Wallace's face flushed. Mr. Lopez, I understand you're upset, but upset. Frank laughed without humor. Lady, I'm disappointed. In you, in him, in this whole damn situation. That woman out there is probably crying in her truck right now, her heart broken, and why? Because she was kind. Because she helped. That's the lesson she learned today. No good deed goes unpunished. He turned to Richard, who still hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. And you, Frank said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You sat there and let them accuse her. Didn't defend her, didn't speak up. Just watched it happen. The woman who saved your life. Richard finally looked up, his face pale. I didn't. You didn't what? Think? Care? Frank's eyes burned with quiet fury. You got so much money you can't imagine someone doing something without wanting payment. You got so much that you forgot what it's like to be human. That's enough, Mr. Lopez. Dr. Wallace warned. No ma'am, it's not nearly enough, but it'll have to do. Frank lay back against his pillows, turning his face to the window. I got nothing else to say to any of you. The room emptied slowly, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts and the ghost of Grace's words hanging in the air like smoke. You lost something much more valuable a long time ago. He stared at his bare finger, at the white band of skin where his ring had lived for 43 years, and wondered if she was right. The rain had finally stopped. 3 days after Harvey made landfall, the sun emerged like a hesitant apology. Houston lay broken and waterlogged beneath it, neighborhoods submerged, highways transformed into rivers, an entire city on its knees. Richard sat in his study at home, his ankle propped on an ottoman, surrounded by luxury that felt suddenly hollow. The house, 12,000 square feet of River Oaks perfection, echoed with emptiness. His wife Evelyn was in New York, trapped by canceled flights, their son Ethan unreachable somewhere in California. The news played on mute. Aerial footage of devastation, reporters standing in chest-deep water, volunteers forming human chains to rescue the stranded. Houston's worst disaster in history, they said. 51 inches of rain in 4 days, hundreds dead, thousands homeless. Richard's phone buzzed constantly. Business partners checking in, investors worried about property damage, his lawyer advising about insurance claims. He answered mechanically, his mind elsewhere. The ring had never turned up. Security footage showed nothing suspicious. No staff entered his room during the crucial hours except Grace, who'd checked on them briefly before returning to the break room. Dr. Wallace had pursued the investigation with vindictive thoroughness, interviewing every person on the floor that night, but found nothing. The leading theory was that it had somehow fallen into the laundry, been swept away with the sheets. Richard knew it was probably true, knew he should let it go. But he couldn't stop thinking about Grace's face, the way her expression had shifted from shock to hurt, to something harder, a wall slamming down, protecting what was left of her dignity. If that's what you think of the person who saved you, then I feel sorry for you. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Ashford, your car is ready. Richard had insisted on being driven past his properties to assess damage. But now, watching his driver pull around front, a new man, not Gregory who'd been with him 15 years, but was home dealing with his own flooded house, Richard felt a strange impulse. Change of plans, he said. Take me to St. Vincent's shelter on Westheimer. The driver's eyebrows rose in the rearview mirror but he said nothing. They drove through streets still slick with water, past piles of ruined furniture stacked on curbs, past houses with water lines marking how high the flood had reached. People were everywhere hauling debris, tearing out soggy drywall, the grim work of rebuilding already begun. St. Vincent's was a low-slung brick building that had seen better days. The parking lot held a motley collection of vehicles, beat-up sedans, a school bus converted into mobile housing, shopping carts containing someone's entire life. "Want me to wait?" the driver asked. "Yes." Richard grabbed his crutches and made his way inside. The lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and something cooking, beans maybe or soup. A volunteer at the desk looked up, surprise flickering across her face at the sight of his expensive suit and crutches. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Frank Lopez. I believe he stays here sometimes." "Frank the guitar man," she smiled. "Everyone knows Frank. He's out back actually. The courtyard through those doors." Richard found him exactly where she said, sitting on a plastic chair under a magnolia tree that had somehow survived the storm, guitar in his lap, surrounded by a half-dozen children, dirty, gap-toothed, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, the children of people with nowhere else to go. Frank was teaching them "This little light of mine," his rough voice leading, their thin voices following. "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." Richard stood in the doorway, unnoticed, watching. One little girl, maybe 6 years old, couldn't get the rhythm right. Frank slowed down, showed her again, patient and gentle. When she finally got it, her face split into a grin that transformed her. "There you go." Frank laughed. "You got it, Rosie. Beautiful." They finished the song, and Frank began another, "You Are My Sunshine." Some of the kids knew it, sang along. Others just swayed, content to listen. Richard felt something twist in his chest. This was what Frank did. This was his empire, his legacy, not buildings or wealth, but moments like this, teaching broken children that they could still make something beautiful. When the song ended, Frank looked up and saw him. Surprise registered, then something guarded. "Mr. Ashford, didn't expect to see you here." The children scattered, sensing adult conversation coming. Richard approached on his crutches, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked. "I wanted to," he stopped, unsure how to continue. "I came to talk." Frank set his guitar down carefully. "All right." They sat in silence for a moment, the courtyard filled with distant sounds, traffic, children playing, a television from inside. "Why are you still smiling?" Richard asked finally. "After everything you've lost." "After," he gestured vaguely. "Everything. How can you smile?" Frank considered the question, his weathered face thoughtful. "You really want to know?" "Yes. Because when you lose everything, what's left is freedom. Freedom from fear, from wanting more, from that constant hunger that never gets satisfied." Frank leaned back in his chair. "You got everything, Mr. Ashford, but you're still afraid. Afraid of losing it. Afraid people want it. Afraid it's not enough. You're trapped by your possessions, even though you think you own them. That's a nice philosophy when you have nothing to lose. See, you keep saying that." Frank's voice was gentle, but firm. "But it ain't true. I got plenty to lose. Got my dignity, got my music, got these kids who look forward to Tuesday afternoons. Got my memories of Maria, and my faith that God's got a plan even when I can't see it. That's not nothing." Richard looked down at his hands. "I accused an innocent woman of theft. I sat there and let them humiliate her, and I did nothing." "Yeah, you did." Frank didn't sugarcoat it. "Why?" Because Richard struggled with the words. "Because I couldn't understand why she'd help me otherwise. Nobody does something for nothing. There's always an angle. That's your world, maybe, not hers." Frank picked up his guitar again, strummed absently. "Grace helped you because she's good. Simple as that. No angle, no expectation. She saw someone who needed help, and she helped. That's all. People like that don't exist. They do. You just spent your whole life avoiding them." Frank played a soft melody. "You know what your problem is. You got so much money, you started thinking everything could be bought, including kindness, including love. But some things only exist when they're given freely." Richard felt his throat tighten. "I don't know how to fix this. Start with sorry. Move on to change." Frank looked at him directly. "That woman risked her life for you. Drove through a hurricane, probably scared out of her mind, because she couldn't leave you there. And how'd you repay her? By assuming the worst, by letting others accuse her. I know, knowing ain't enough." Frank's voice was harder now. You gotta do something about it. Not for her, she don't need your apology to survive. But you need to give it. You need to become the kind of man who deserves what she did for you. They sat in silence, the weight of truth settling between them. How did you do it? Richard asked quietly. After your wife died, after you lost everything, how did you not become bitter? Frank was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still moving on the guitar strings. I did become bitter. For a while, cursed God, cursed the world, cursed everyone who still had what I'd lost. He paused. Then one day I was sitting under a bridge, drinking away what little money I had, and this kid came up to me. 12 years old, homeless with his mama. He saw my guitar and asked if I'd teach him a song. Did you? I told him to get lost. I was drunk and mean and didn't want to be bothered. Frank's voice grew softer. He came back the next day, and the next, every day for a week, asking for just one song. Finally I got so annoyed, I showed him 3 chords, just to shut him up. Richard waited, but you know what happened. When he finally played those chords, when he made that guitar sing, his whole face lit up, like someone turned on a light inside him, and I realized I could still do that. I could still give people something worth more than money. I could give them music, give them hope, give them a reason to smile even when everything was terrible. Is that enough? Richard asked. Enough to make up for what you lost? No. Frank's honesty was stark. Nothing makes up for losing Maria. Nothing fills that hole. But, he gestured to the courtyard, to the building behind them, to the city beyond. But I can make sure her death meant something. I can make sure that the love she showed me keeps going, through me, to other people. That's not replacement. It's legacy. Richard stared at the ground, feeling tears he hadn't cried in decades pressing behind his eyes. I've built an empire, 40 years of work, and I don't think I've made a single person's face light up the way that kid's did. It's not too late, Frank said simply. You're still breathing, still standing. Well, mostly. He nodded at Richard's crutches with a small smile. You still got time to build something that matters. I don't know how. Start small. Apologize to Grace. Really apologize, not just words, but change. Show her you understood what she taught you. What did she teach me? Frank met his eyes. That kindness is its own reward, that some people give without expectation, that the world is better than you believed it was. A bell rang inside the shelter. Dinner time. Children came pouring out, racing past them toward the cafeteria. One, the little girl Rosie, stopped to hug Frank's legs. Bye, Mr. Frank. See you Tuesday, sweetheart. You practice that song now. She nodded solemnly, and ran off. Frank watched her go, his face tender. That's why I smile, Mr. Ashford, because even in the worst times, even after losing everything, there's still that. There's still kids who need songs and people who need hope and moments that matter. Richard nodded slowly, something shifting inside him, something that had been frozen for a very long time beginning to thaw. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me, just do better, be better. Frank stood, picking up his guitar. And if you really want to honor what Grace did for you, don't just apologize, change. Become the kind of man who would have defended her in that room. Become the kind of man who sees people, not possessions. He headed inside, leaving Richard alone in the courtyard, with his crutches and his thoughts, and the first real understanding of what he'd lost that night in room 307. It wasn't the ring, it was his humanity, and it was time to find it again. Richard's wife Evelyn returned home a week after the storm, stepping off a delayed flight from LaGuardia, into a Houston still picking up the pieces. She was an elegant woman of 71, with silver hair cut in a practical bob, and the kind of presence that came from decades of running charity boards, and managing a household that doubled as a venue for Houston's elite. She found Richard in his study, staring out the window at the city skyline, his ankle finally freed from its wrap. Darling, she kissed his cheek, smelling of airplane air and expensive perfume. I've been so worried. Are you all right? Fine. The word came automatically, hollow. Evelyn set down her bag, studying him with the sharp attention of 43 years of marriage. You're not fine. Tell me what's wrong. I lost my wedding ring. I know, you told me on the phone. She sat across from him, crossing her legs. It's insured, we can have another made. It's not about the ring. Then what is it about? Richard told her. Everything. The storm. Grace stopping on Spencer Highway, the wheelchair, room 307, Frank's guitar in the darkness, the accusation, Dr. Wallace's implications, Grace's devastated face as she walked out. Evelyn listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled as the story unfolded. Let me understand this clearly, she said when he finished. This woman, this nurse drove through Hurricane Harvey to save you, risked her life, got you to safety, stayed with you through the night, and when your ring went missing, you allowed them to accuse her. You said nothing. I didn't. Richard stopped. I didn't know what to say. How about she saved my life? She's not a thief. Evelyn's voice was sharp. How about defending the person who rescued you? I wasn't thinking clearly. No, you weren't thinking about her at all. You were thinking about your ring, your inconvenience, your world. Evelyn stood, pacing to the window. Richard, I love you, but sometimes, I wonder if you remember what it's like to be human. The words so similar to Frank's hit like a physical blow. That's not fair, Richard protested weakly, isn't it? Evelyn turned to face him. When was the last time you did something kind without expecting recognition? When was the last time you saw a person instead of their utility to you? Richard had no answer. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. Do you know why I fell in love with you? Back when you were 25, working 3 jobs, living in that awful studio apartment. Because I was charming and devastatingly handsome. Richard attempted a smile. Because you were kind, you held doors for strangers, you gave your lunch to homeless men, you saw people, really saw them. She sat beside him, taking his hand. Somewhere along the way, between the first million and the 100th, you forgot that. You started measuring people by their net worth instead of their worth as human beings. I've worked hard for everything I have. I know you have, and I'm proud of you. But Richard, she squeezed his hand, this woman saved your life, and you let her be humiliated. That's not the man I married. That's not the man you used to be. Silence settled between them, heavy with 43 years of shared history. I don't know how to fix this, Richard admitted. Yes you do. You apologize. Really apologize. Not a check, not a donation in her name, but a real human apology. You look her in the eye, and you tell her you were wrong. She won't want to see me, probably not. Do it anyway. Evelyn stood, and Richard, don't do it for her. Do it for yourself. Because the man who saved her life doesn't need her gratitude, but you need to thank her, to become the kind of person who deserves what she did for you. After Evelyn left, Richard sat alone with his thoughts. Through the window, he could see Houston rebuilding, construction crews working overtime, volunteers gutting houses, the slow, painful process of recovery. He thought about Frank's smile, about those children in the shelter courtyard, about the way Grace had looked at him when he was just a scared old man in the rain, before she knew his name, or his net worth. I know you're hurt, and I know the hospital is the only place open tonight that can help. She hadn't asked who he was, hadn't calculated the reward, she just helped. When was the last time he'd done anything like that? Richard picked up his phone, called his assistant. I need you to find someone for me. Grace Miller, she's a nurse at Pasadena Community Hospital. Sir, just find her. I need an address, a phone number, where she's working now, everything. Of course Mr. Ashford. He hung up and stared at his bare finger, at the white band of skin that hadn't seen sunlight in 4 decades. The ring was gone, probably lost forever in hospital laundry, or swept away in floodwater. But maybe that was fitting. Maybe he needed to lose something precious to understand what really mattered. 2 days later, Richard's driver pulled up to a worn-down building in Pasadena, Sunshine Senior Living Center, a nursing home that had clearly seen better days. Peeling paint, cracked sidewalk, the kind of place where people went when they couldn't afford anywhere better. You want me to come in, Mr. Ashford? The driver asked. No, I'll manage. Richard made his way inside, his ankle still tender but functional. The lobby smelled like institutional food and bleach, trying to mask something underneath. A receptionist looked up, blinking at his expensive suit like he'd landed from another planet. "Can I help you? I'm looking for Grace Miller. I believe she works here." "Grace." The receptionist's face brightened. "Oh, she's wonderful. Down the hall, third door on the right, the activity room." Richard followed the directions, passing elderly residents in wheelchairs, a janitor mopping up a spill, a television playing game shows to an empty room. This was so far from the luxury care facilities his mother had spent her final years in, places with marble lobbies and gourmet kitchens and staff-to-patient ratios that cost six figures annually. He found her in the activity room, sitting beside an ancient woman with wispy white hair and vacant eyes. Grace was reading aloud from a paperback romance novel, her voice gentle and patient, though the woman clearly didn't understand a word. Richard stood in the doorway, watching. Grace's scrubs were different. These were patterned with sunflowers, cheerful and cheap, but her expression was the same. That focused kindness, that genuine care for a person who couldn't give anything back. She looked up and saw him. Her entire body went rigid. "Mr. Ashford." "Grace." Richard stepped inside, suddenly uncertain. "Could we talk? I'm working. I can wait." She studied him for a long moment, then turned back to the old woman. "Mrs. Moore, I need to step out for a minute. I'll be right back, okay?" No response. Grace stroked the woman's hand gently, then stood. "5 minutes," she said to Richard. Outside, they walked to a small courtyard behind the building, a sad square of concrete with a few plastic chairs and struggling plants. Grace crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "How did you find me?" "I asked around." Richard realized how creepy that sounded. "I mean, I wanted to apologize. Properly. You could have called. This needed to be in person." Grace said nothing, waiting. Richard took a breath. "I was wrong. What happened that night, the accusations, the way I handled it, all of it was wrong. You saved my life, Grace. You drove through a hurricane when you didn't have to. You got me to safety. You stayed with me. And when your character was questioned, I said nothing. I didn't defend you. I let them treat you like a criminal." "Yes, you did." Her bluntness was jarring. No softening, no polite acceptance, just truth. "I'm sorry," Richard continued. "Truly sorry, not just for the accusations, but for assuming the worst of you, for not understanding that some people are simply good. I'm not looking for sainthood, Mr. Ashford. I'm a nurse. Helping people is my job. It's more than that. You could have driven past me. Most people would have, but you didn't." Grace looked away, at the struggling plants, at the cracked concrete. "You want me to forgive you, make you feel better about what happened?" "No, I mean yes," but Richard struggled. "I want you to know that I understand now what you did, what it meant, and I want to be better, be the kind of person who deserves what you did. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Ashford. Maybe not, but I owe it to myself." He paused. "Frank Lopez helped me see that. He told me I'd lost something more valuable than the ring." Grace's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe recognition. "You talked to Frank?" "I went to the shelter, saw him teaching kids guitar." Richard smiled despite himself. "He told me I was trapped by my possessions, that I'd forgotten how to be human." "Frank's wise. He also told me that if I wanted to honor what you did, I shouldn't just apologize, I should change, actually become someone better." Grace was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. "You really don't owe me anything, but if you change, if you become someone who helps the next person without question, without judgment, then someone else gets saved. That's worth more than any apology you could give me." Richard nodded, feeling something in his chest, not relief, exactly, but the beginning of understanding. "Why do you work here?" He gestured at the building. "You could work anywhere. Better hospitals, better pay, because they need me here." Grace's answer was simple. "These people don't have families visiting, don't have advocates, don't have anyone who sees them as people instead of problems. So I read to Mrs. Moore, even though she doesn't understand. I hold Mr. Patterson's hand when he's scared. I make sure they die with dignity, even if they can't remember their own names." "That's," Richard couldn't find the words, "that's remarkable. It's basic humanity, Mr. Ashford, something we all should do." She checked her watch. "I need to get back. Mrs. Moore gets anxious when I'm gone too long. Of course, Richard stood. Thank you, for listening, for everything. Grace nodded and turned to go, then paused. Mr. Ashford, the ring, did it ever turn up? No, I'm sorry. I know it had sentimental value. It did. But Frank was right. I lost something more important. I'm working on getting that back. Grace studied him for a moment, then something in her expression softened. Good luck with that. She left him standing in the courtyard, surrounded by struggling plants and broken concrete, feeling more alive than he had in years. 3 weeks after Harvey, Richard sat in the conference room at Ben Taub Hospital, facing Dr. Wallace and the hospital's administrative team. His lawyer sat beside him, expensive briefcase unopened. He hadn't needed to bring legal representation. This wasn't that kind of meeting. But old habits died hard. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Ashford, Dr. Wallace said, her tone professional but wary. We wanted to update you on the investigation into your missing ring. Richard nodded, waiting. We found it. Dr. Wallace slid a plastic evidence bag across the table. Inside, his platinum wedding band caught the fluorescent light. It was recovered from the belongings of another patient who was on the 3rd floor that night. Mr. Dennis Crawford, room 312. He has advanced dementia and a history of collecting items. Relief and shame washed over Richard in equal measure. So Grace, Nurse Miller, was never a suspect in any official capacity, Dr. Wallace interrupted, though her cheeks colored slightly. We were simply investigating all possibilities. You publicly humiliated her, Richard said quietly. We followed protocol. You assumed the worst because she wasn't on your staff, because she looked like someone who might need money more than integrity. Richard's voice was steady, but firm. Let's be honest about what happened.
Dr. Wallace's jaw tightened. Mr. Ashford, I'd like to make a statement, a public one. Richard pulled out his phone. I've already spoken to the media relations office. I'm holding a press conference tomorrow at noon. I wanted to inform you as a courtesy. A press conference about what? About Grace Miller. About how she saved my life during Harvey, and how I failed her. How we all failed her. He met Dr. Wallace's eyes, and about how I plan to make it right. The next day, Richard stood at a podium in the hospital's main lobby. Cameras from every Houston news station pointed at him. He'd done hundreds of press conferences over the years, new building announcements, charity donations, business mergers. He knew how to work a room, how to control a narrative. This time was different. My name is Richard Ashford, he began, his voice carrying across the crowded space. 3 weeks ago, during Hurricane Harvey, a nurse named Grace Miller saved my life. He told the whole story, being stranded on Spencer Highway, Grace stopping despite the danger, the wheelchair, the drive through rising water. His voice remained steady until he reached the part about the missing ring. When my wedding ring went missing at this hospital, assumptions were made. Grace Miller, the woman who had risked her life for me just hours earlier, was treated as a suspect, not officially, perhaps, but the implication was clear, and he paused, fighting the tightness in his throat. I said nothing. I didn't defend her. I let her be humiliated and dismissed because I couldn't understand why someone would help me without wanting something in return. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked. The ring was found. It was taken by another patient with dementia, an innocent mistake. But Grace Miller's reputation was damaged. Her trust was broken, and I want to publicly acknowledge that she is innocent, that she has always been innocent, and that she is one of the best people I have ever met. Richard gripped the podium. I'm a successful businessman. I've built an empire over 40 years, but Grace Miller, who probably makes in a year what I make in a day, is richer than I'll ever be, because she has something I'd lost, genuine kindness, the kind that expects nothing in return. She saved me not because I'm Richard Ashford, but because I'm a human being who needed help. He looked directly into the camera. Grace, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I'm profoundly sorry for my failure to see your character, for my failure to defend you, for allowing my cynicism to blind me to genuine goodness. You deserved better from me, from all of us. Richard paused, then continued. And to everyone watching, when someone helps you, when someone shows you kindness, don't question their motives. Don't assume an angle. Sometimes people are simply good,
and we need to protect that goodness, celebrate it, not punish it. The press conference erupted in questions, but Richard stepped away from the podium. He'd said what he needed to say. Later that afternoon, his phone rang. An unknown number. "Mr. Ashford, this is Frank Lopez." Richard sat up straighter. "Frank, I saw you at the press conference." "Yeah, I snuck in the back. Security tried to kick me out, but I told them I was a witness." Frank chuckled. "You did good, man. Real good. I should have done it weeks ago. Better late than never. But listen, I need to tell you something. About that night when the ring went missing." Richard's heart sank. "What about it?" "I saw something. Didn't realize it mattered until later, but around 2 a.m., when the power was out, I heard someone come into the room. Couldn't see who in the dark, but I heard them bumping around near your bed. Heard something drop, someone curse, then they left. Why didn't you say anything? Didn't know the ring was missing yet. And honestly, I was half asleep, thought maybe it was just a nurse checking vitals." Frank paused, "But when they started accusing Grace, I told Dr. Wallace, told her someone else had been in the room. She didn't want to hear it, because it complicated her narrative." "Exactly. Easier to blame the outsider." Frank's voice grew warmer. "But you made it right. That takes courage, admitting you were wrong in front of the whole world. It was the least I could do, maybe, but it's more than most people would do." Frank was quiet for a moment. "You're learning, Richard, slowly, but you're learning." They talked for a few more minutes, Frank sharing stories about his week. A new student who'd learned 3 chords, a woman at the shelter who'd finally gotten a job interview, small victories in hard lives. Before hanging up, Frank said, "You know I'm back at Ben Taub right now. Same old problems, different day, but room 307's empty if you wanted to visit. Might be therapeutic." Richard found himself smiling. "I might do that." After they hung up, Richard sat in his study, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, peace maybe, or at least the beginning of it. He'd done the right thing finally, publicly, irrevocably. The story spread fast. By evening it was on every news site. Houston real estate magnate apologizes to Harvey hero. Grace's face appeared in articles, her nursing license photo showing a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a genuine smile. Richard hoped she'd see it, hoped she'd understand he meant every word. More importantly, he hoped he was finally becoming the kind of man who deserved what she'd done for him. 6 months later, spring arrived in Houston like a promise kept. The city had rebuilt with remarkable resilience, houses repaired, streets cleared, the visible scars of Harvey fading even as the emotional ones remained. Richard had thrown himself into recovery efforts, donating millions to flood relief, working with organizations he'd never have noticed before the storm. He'd stayed in touch with Frank, visiting St. Vincent's monthly, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to help with whatever was needed. They'd formed an unlikely friendship. The real estate magnate, and the homeless guitar teacher, 2 men who'd met in a hospital room, and somehow found common ground. Grace he'd seen only once, briefly at a Harvey anniversary event. She'd been gracious but distant, the wall still there. Richard didn't blame her. Some wounds took time to heal. That's why the call from St. Vincent's caught him off guard. "Mr. Ashford, this is Maria from the shelter. Frank asked me to call you. He's back at Ben Taub. He wanted you to know." Richard's stomach dropped. What happened? His lungs. They've been bad for years, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease from years of smoking when he was younger. But this time, her voice cracked, this time it's bad. They're saying he doesn't have long. Richard was in his car within minutes, driving to the hospital with a sense of urgency that felt painfully familiar. But this time, he wasn't the one being saved. Ben Taub's 3rd floor felt different in daylight, less chaotic but somehow more somber. Richard found Frank in a room, 2 doors down from 307, hooked up to oxygen, his weathered face somehow more weathered, his vibrant energy dimmed, but his smile, that incredible transformative smile, was still there. "Richard," Frank's voice was weak, breathless. "You came." "Of course I came." Richard pulled a chair close to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like my lungs are full of concrete and my time's running out." Frank chuckled, which turned into a coughing fit. When he recovered he added, "But I've had worse days. Don't joke about this." "Why not? It's the truth. We're all dying, friend. Some of us just know the timeline better than others." Frank adjusted his oxygen mask. "Gives you perspective though. makes you think about what matters. Richard felt tears pressing behind his eyes. You can't, there must be treatment options. There are. Expensive ones. Frank shook his head slightly. But I'm 73, Richard. My body's tired, and honestly, I'm ready. Been ready since Maria died, just been sticking around to finish what I started. Teaching kids guitar isn't finished. Those children need you. They'll be fine. I taught some of the older ones how to teach the younger ones. Music doesn't die, it just gets passed on. Frank's eyes found Richard's. Besides, I got something else to finish. Something with you. What do you mean? Frank reached for something on his bedside table, a manila envelope, thin and worn. Been carrying this around for a month, waiting for the right time. Guess this is it. Frank, just take it. Don't open it yet though. Wait until, he coughed again. Wait until after, you'll know when. Richard took the envelope, his hands trembling. You're going to be fine. You're too stubborn to die. Everyone dies, friend. Even stubborn old fools like me. Frank's smile was gentle. But I'm not scared. You know why? Why? Because I lived. Really lived. Loved a good woman, made music, helped some kids find joy, lost everything, and found something better, found purpose. He gripped Richard's hand with surprising strength. That's what I wanted to tell you. You're doing good now, Richard. Real good. Keep doing it. Don't let my dying stop what you started. I don't know if I can do this without you. Sure you can. You got Grace, whether she's fully forgiven you or not. You got Evelyn. You got yourself, the new version, the one who remembers how to be human. Frank's breathing was more labored now. Promise me something, anything. Don't build me a statue. Don't put my name on a building. Frank's eyes were fierce despite his weakness. Help people, actually help them. Not with your name attached, not for recognition, just help. I promise. They sat in silence for a while. Frank's breathing rattling, Richard's tears finally falling. A nurse came in to check vitals, her expression sympathetic. Does he have family? She asked Richard quietly. No, just friends. Then I'm glad he has you. Richard called Grace from the hallway, not sure if she'd answer. She did, on the third ring. Mr. Ashford. Grace, it's Frank. He's at Ben Taub. He's Richard's voice broke. He doesn't have much time. I thought you'd want to know. Silence on the line, then a soft, I'll be right there. She arrived 20 minutes later, still in her Sunshine Senior Living scrubs, her face pale. Richard met her outside Frank's room. How bad? She asked. Bad. But he's still Frank, still smiling. Grace nodded, steeling herself, then pushed open the door. Frank's eyes lit up when he saw her. Angel, they said you'd come, but I wasn't sure you'd want to see this old fool again. Don't be ridiculous. Grace pulled a chair to his other side, taking his free hand. Of course I came. Look at this, Frank said, his voice weak but warm. Got both of you here, the two best people I met in the worst night of my life. That's something, ain't it? You're the best person we met, Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. Nah, I'm just a man who lost everything, and found out what matters. You two, you're the ones doing the real work now. He looked between them. You making peace yet? Richard and Grace exchanged glances. We're working on it, Grace said carefully. Good, life's too short for grudges. Trust me, I'm an expert on short lives right now. Frank chuckled, which turned into another coughing fit. They stayed with him through the afternoon, and into evening, taking turns stepping out for coffee, or just to breathe. Nurses came and went, adjusting medications, offering comfort. The doctor, a kind woman who clearly knew Frank, pulled them aside around 8 p.m. His lung function is declining rapidly. We're keeping him comfortable, but it could be tonight, maybe tomorrow. I'm sorry. Richard nodded numbly. Grace thanked her with professional composure that cracked the moment the doctor left. He can't die, she whispered. Not Frank. He's too alive. I know. They returned to his room. Frank was dozing, his face peaceful despite the oxygen mask. His guitar sat in the corner. Someone from the shelter had brought it, knowing he'd want it near. Around midnight, Frank woke. He looked at them both, his eyes clear despite his body's failure. Sing with me. His voice was barely audible. Frank, you need to rest. Grace started. Please, one more song. He looked at Richard. Get my guitar. Richard retrieved it carefully, placed it across Frank's lap. Frank's fingers found the strings with muscle memory. though his playing was weak, halting. "Amazing Grace," he said. "Seems fitting." He began to play, each note an effort. Grace's voice joined first, clear and strong despite her tears. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Richard added his voice, unpracticed, off-key, but sincere. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." Frank's fingers slowed, but his lips moved with the words, his eyes closed. "Through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come." When they reached the final verse, Frank's hands stilled on the strings. He opened his eyes, looking at each of them with infinite tenderness. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for being the kind of people who restore an old man's faith in humanity." "Frank," Grace sobbed, "Shiz, it's okay, I'm going home, going to see Maria again." He smiled, and for a moment he looked young, vibrant, full of life. "Tell those kids at the shelter, tell them to keep playing. Music don't die, love don't die, they just change form." His eyes drifted closed, his breathing slowed. Richard and Grace sat on either side of him, each holding a hand, as Frank Lopez, guitar teacher, homeless man, and the kindest soul either of them had ever known, slipped away. The machines beeped. A nurse came in, checked for a pulse, marked the time with quiet professionalism. 12:47 a.m. Frank had died as he'd lived, surrounded by music, holding the hands of people he'd changed forever. Later in the empty hallway, Richard remembered the envelope. He pulled it out with shaking hands, Grace looking over his shoulder as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Frank's handwriting shaky but legible. "Dear Richard and Grace, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't be sad. I lived a good life, especially these last months watching you two become the people you were meant to be. Don't build a statue for me. Don't put my name on anything fancy. I got a better idea. Build something for people like me. Not a shelter, plenty of those, never enough, but they exist. Build something different, a place where people without insurance, without money, without advocates, can get medical care, real care, not emergency room care. Call it whatever you want, just make sure it helps people who fall through the cracks, people like Maria, who died because we couldn't afford treatment, people who need someone to see them as human beings, not problems, or statistics. I was poor my whole life, but if my poverty and my death can help two rich, brilliant people like you create something that saves others, well, then I'm the richest man who ever lived. Don't mourn me, honor me by being kind to the next person who needs help. That's all any of us can do. With love and gratitude, Frank. P.S. Grace, Grace, you were right. Kindness is its own reward. Never stop being you. P.P.S. Grace, Richard, you're not trapped anymore. You're free. Use that freedom to free others." Grace was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. Richard's vision blurred as he read the words again and again. "He's still teaching us," Grace said through her tears. "Even now." "Yeah." Richard folded the letter carefully. "He is." They sat together on a bench in the empty hallway, two people who'd met in a storm and been forever changed by a man with nothing but a guitar and a heart full of love. Outside, the Houston dawn was breaking, and somewhere Frank Lopez was playing his guitar for Maria, both of them young again, both of them home. 1 year later, the morning sun blazed over Houston, reflecting off the glass and steel of the new medical building on the city's Near East Side. Not the glittering heights of the medical center, but something else. A 4-story structure designed with warmth rather than grandeur, with windows that let in light and murals painted by local artists covering the walls. Above the entrance, simple letters spelled out, "Room 307 Foundation Free Medical Clinic." Inside, Grace Miller stood in the lobby, watching the final preparations. Staff members, nurses, doctors, social workers, moved with purposeful energy, preparing for the official opening. The waiting room could hold 50 people, with comfortable chairs, a children's play area, and a small stage in the corner. Nervous, Evelyn Ashford appeared at her elbow, elegant in a simple blue dress. Terrified, Grace admitted, "What if nobody comes? What if we built this and it doesn't help anyone?" "They'll come." Evelyn squeezed her shoulder. "Trust me, word has spread. There are people already lining up outside." Grace moved to the window, and saw it was true. A line snaking around the building, families with children, elderly folks in wheelchairs, people who looked like they'd been carrying their burdens for far too long. Her eyes filled with tears. Frank would have loved this. He's here, Evelyn said softly. In every person who walks through those doors. Richard appeared, walking confidently now, his ankle fully healed. Beside him was Ethan, his son, who'd taken a leave from his tech job in California to help manage the foundation. At 38, Ethan had inherited his father's business acumen, but his mother's compassion, and watching him coordinate with staff these past months, had filled Richard with more pride than any skyscraper ever had. "Ready?" Richard asked Grace. "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked together to the entrance, where a small crowd had gathered, local reporters, community leaders, shelter directors, pastors, not the flashy media circus of Richard's typical announcements, but people who understood what this place meant. Richard stepped to the microphone, his voice carrying across the crowd. "1 year ago, I met a man named Frank Lopez in room 307, at Ben Taub Hospital during Hurricane Harvey. He was homeless, he was dying, and he was the kindest soul I'd ever encountered. Before he passed, Frank left us a letter, not asking for monuments or recognition, but asking us to help others the way Grace Miller helped me that night in the storm." He gestured to the building behind them. "This is our answer to Frank's request. Room 307 Foundation will provide free medical care to anyone who needs it, regardless of insurance status, immigration status, or ability to pay. We'll offer primary care, dental services, mental health counseling, and help navigating a healthcare system that's failed too many people like Frank's wife, Maria." Grace stepped forward, her voice quieter but firm with conviction. "Frank used to say that kindness doesn't need a house to shelter in. It just needs a heart to grow in. But today, we're giving kindness a house, a place where people can come and be seen, truly seen, as human beings deserving of dignity and care." She pointed to the massive mural covering the lobby wall, a stunning painting by local artist Carmen Rodriguez, showing hands of every color reaching toward each other, and in the center, a man with white hair and a guitar, his face lit with that unmistakable Frank Lopez smile. "Frank told us that when you lose everything, what remains is freedom," Grace continued. "The freedom to choose who you become, the freedom to be kind when the world gives you every reason to be bitter. This foundation is our choice, to become people who don't walk past suffering, who don't judge by bank accounts, who remember that everyone deserves care." Ethan stepped forward, carrying oversized ceremonial scissors. "We'd like to invite Carmen Rodriguez, Frank's sister-in-law, and the artist of our beautiful mural, to cut the ribbon with us." Carmen came forward, a woman in her 60s with Maria's gentle eyes and Frank's radiant smile. "My sister Maria and my brother Frank believed in 3 things," she said, her voice thick with emotion: love, music and helping others. They died too young, both of them. But this, she looked up at the building, tears streaming freely, "this building is their song, still playing, still changing lives." Together, Richard, Grace, Carmen, Ethan and Evelyn, they cut the ribbon. Applause erupted, the doors opened wide, and the people waiting began to file in, each one greeted by name, each one welcomed home. Inside the lobby, Grace and Richard positioned themselves at the welcome desk alongside trained intake staff, wanting to greet the first patients personally. An elderly Vietnamese woman came first, diabetic and frightened, who hadn't seen a doctor in 4 years because she couldn't afford it. Grace held her hand, speaking slowly and clearly, promising her she was safe here. A young father arrived with his 6-year-old son struggling to breathe, asthma that had gone untreated, because his construction job offered no health benefits. Richard watched as pediatric specialists whisked the boy away, the father's shoulders shaking with relief. A teenage girl came alone, having walked 3 miles, carrying a secret she'd been too scared and too poor to address, a lump she'd discovered months ago, but had no way to get checked. Grace wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and personally escorted her to the women's health wing. One after another they came. People who'd been invisible, people who'd been falling through the cracks, people who'd given up hope that anyone cared. Each one was registered with dignity, each one was seen by providers who'd volunteered their time. Each one was treated as if they were the only patient in the world. In the corner of the lobby, On the small stage, 5 teenagers from St. Vincent's Shelter were setting up their instruments. These were Frank's last students, kids he'd taught in his final year, who now played together as a band, keeping his music alive. They started with Amazing Grace, and the bustling lobby fell silent. Richard stood beside Grace, both of them watching with tears in their eyes, as sick people found healing, as scared people found safety, as invisible people were finally seen. "We did it," Richard whispered. "Frank did it," Grace corrected gently. "We're just the instruments. He's still conducting. I miss him every day." "Me too." Grace smiled through her tears. "But I hear him every time we help someone. Every time we choose compassion over judgment. He's still teaching us, Richard. He'll always be teaching us." Ethan appeared, tablet in hand, his face flushed with excited energy. "The waiting room is already at capacity and we've got 40 more people in line outside. Mom's coordinating with nearby churches to provide food and water for those waiting. We might need to extend hours, maybe add weekend shifts." "Do it," Richard said immediately. "Whatever it takes, hire more staff, add more hours, rent temporary space if we need to. Nobody gets turned away, ever." Grace looked at him with pride. "You sound like Frank." "Good," Richard said softly. "That's exactly who I want to sound like." As the afternoon wore on, Grace found herself back in an exam room, doing what she loved most, direct patient care. The woman before her was exhausted and scared, her untreated diabetes now causing serious complications. "I'm so sorry I waited this long," the woman said, shame in her voice. "I just couldn't afford to see anyone, and I kept hoping it would get better on its own." "You're here now," Grace interrupted, her voice full of warmth. "That's all that matters. We're going to take care of you, and you're never going to have to choose between your health and your rent again. That's a promise." The woman broke down crying, tears of relief, of hope, of being seen as human, instead of a problem or a statistic. This, Grace thought, this is why we did it. For moments exactly like this, later that evening, after the last patient had been seen and the staff had finally gone home, Grace found herself climbing to the 3rd floor. She walked down the quiet hallway to a room marked simply 307. This wasn't a medical exam room, it was something else entirely, a space for contemplation, for peace, for remembering why they did this work. She opened the door. The room was simple but beautiful. Comfortable chairs faced floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Houston skyline. Soft lighting created a warm glow, and on the main wall, in a climate-controlled glass case, hung Frank's guitar, the same battered acoustic that had played Amazing Grace in the darkness of a hospital room during a hurricane. Below the guitar, mounted on a brass plaque, were Frank's final written words: "Don't build a statue for me, build something for someone else. Don't make me immortal, make kindness immortal. That's all any of us can do." Grace sat in one of the chairs, exhausted but deeply fulfilled. Through the window, Houston's lights twinkled, a city that had been broken by Harvey but had rebuilt itself stronger, kinder, more connected. The door opened quietly. Richard entered, looking equally drained but peaceful. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Successful first day, beyond our wildest projections." Richard leaned back, closing his eyes. "We helped 83 people today, 83 human beings who might have suffered or died without this place. Frank would be so proud. Frank would probably tell us we're just getting started." Richard opened his eyes, looking at the guitar on the wall, and he'd be right. This is just the beginning. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights, feeling Frank's presence in the room like a warm embrace. "I never properly thanked you," Richard said finally, his voice soft, "for that night, for stopping in the storm, for saving my life. You've thanked me approximately 200 times. Grace smiled. "And you built an entire medical clinic. I think we're beyond even. We'll never be even. You didn't just save my life, you saved my soul. You reminded me what it means to be human." He turned to look at her directly. "And you forgave me when I didn't deserve it." Grace was quiet for a moment, remembering that terrible day when they'd accused her, when her faith in humanity had cracked. "I was so angry. I thought maybe my mother was wrong. Maybe being kind just meant getting hurt. But you stayed kind anyway, because of Frank." Grace looked at the guitar, at the soft light, reflecting off its worn wood.
He lost everything and chose kindness. If he could do that from his position, how could I do any less from mine? He changed both of us. He changed everyone he touched. That was his superpower, seeing the best in broken people, and refusing to give up on them. Grace stood, walking to the glass case, placing her palm against it. You know what I realized? Frank collected people the way others collect money. We were his wealth, and look at what he left behind. Richard joined her, both of them looking at the guitar that had made so much music, brought so much comfort, changed so many lives. Not bad for a homeless guitar teacher, Richard said softly. He was never homeless, Grace corrected. He just didn't live in a building. His home was wherever he could help someone, wherever he could make music, wherever love existed. She turned to Richard. That's our job now, to be that kind of home for people, to make them feel seen and safe and valued. I still catch myself slipping sometimes, Richard admitted. Old habits, judging people by their net worth, measuring success in dollars and square footage. But you catch yourself, you correct it. That's what Frank wanted. Not perfection, just effort, just the choice to try again every single day. A soft chime from Richard's phone. A text from Evelyn. 37 people have already pre-registered for tomorrow. Word is spreading. You're going to need more staff. Richard showed Grace the message. She laughed, the sound bright and hopeful. Looks like we're going to be busy. Good, Richard said firmly. Let's be busy saving lives. Let's be busy being the change Frank believed we could be. They left room 307 together, turning off the lights, leaving Frank's guitar to stand watch through the night. Behind them the guitar seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, not with any supernatural light, but with the accumulated love of everyone it had touched, everyone it had comforted, everyone whose life had been changed by 3 chords and the truth.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.